biggest expedition in my whole diving career.
The Amber Room is the world's most valuable missing architectural art treasure. An entire room faced with ancient ambers which vanished, never to be seen again.
It was one of the most prized possessions really in Europe. There is a chance that it's still out there somewhere.
It's such a huge thing that I can't even imagine how I would feel if we were to find it.
What we do know certainly is the Amber Room was packed up in crates in January 1945, ready to be evacuated.
Of course, once people started talking about the Amber Room, the possibility that this could be on this wreck, it's like putting a pound on the lottery, isn't it? It's like you might not win, but you might.
Strzał, wiesz, 8 poziomy, nie?
I'm very lucky guy because I was born in Gdynia. And Gdynia is so beautiful. My son is involved in kite surfing. We spent a lot of time on the sea. Of course, we have to remember what's happened here. Gdansk Bay was the scene of terrible thing during the Second World War.
We were attacked by Germans from the west and Russia from the east. Hundreds of ships were lost here. As a diver, I have seen the wrecks with my own eyes.
My son generation are asking why we have so many wrecks over there. So what exactly happened here on this Gdansk Bay during the war?
So much of it has been forgotten. Most of the wrecks don't even have names.
I wanted to fill in the missing pieces of the history, so I decided to investigate the wrecks myself. But with so many out there, the first question was where to start.
I know Tomasz for over 20 years. We dive together. When he asked me to help him find information about wrecks, I said, sure, I will have a look. I started to work through historic documents, archives, all reports and all the sources that could help us find more information about the wrecks. I discovered that in the last few months of World War II, almost 250 ships went down in this area.
We are not professional historians, but every day you discover more and more and more. What was the reason why this wreck sank? What is the real name of this wreck? How she sank, and so on.
But then I found something amazing. There was a letter written by a German civilian. Her name was Cecile Alschut, and she described boarding a ship called Karlsruhe on 11th April 1945.
With my children, 2 and 4 years old, I had been assigned a place on the ship. The captain gave orders to leave all the prams on the upper deck. The sun set, but when the morning came, 3 Russian planes appeared. Bullets ripped across the deck. One plane was shot down just meters from the ship. A truck on the deck crashed through to the hold. Then I felt the ice-cold water. My children are gone. There is nothing left of the Karlsruhe. Within 3 minutes, she sank to the bottom of the Baltic Sea.
I was so moved by the letter. I had to know more. Over 1,000 German passengers were on board the ship. Just 113 survived. But the wreck of the Karlsruhe was not even marked on any of the charts. The story of this ship was so interesting, I decided to try to find this wreck. But I had no idea that I will be pulled into a completely different mystery.
For an expedition like this, I knew I'd need to get a really good team together.
I called to everybody and said, I want to go to Karlsruhe, can you help me? Everybody said yes, 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 and it was amazing.
Tomek was saying that he needs divers who are familiar with the conditions of cold water and deep depth, and we were expecting a long dives on these harsh conditions.
I'm predominantly a cave diver and a cave explorer.
Me and Phil go way back. I'm his former student, so I became a cave diving instructor because of him. I met my girlfriend Jenny through diving.
Sami called me and said, oh, there is this expedition going on. It sounded super amazing and very exciting, something that I had never done before.
I am afraid that I was not very good father, not very good husband, because 80% of my time I was focused on this expedition.
Planning the expedition took months. But for me, the biggest challenge had been locating the wreck in the first place.
We knew about Karlsruhe. We wanted to find Karlsruhe, but we didn't know where is the wreck.
We talk and talk and talk about this, and finally we met in the bar just to compare everything what we have.
And if you look here, this is the beginning. However, we know the fact, and you know the report has the pictures.
What is the difference between this? During the Second World War, everybody spied on each other, yes? So you have different sources to check. One source is British, one source is German, and one source is Russian.
This is High Command, German High Command.
Okay.
They say 3 escorts.
The German naval records confirmed the account by the survivor Cecil Alschot that the steamer Karlsruhe was carrying over 1,000 passengers and heavy cargo. She set sail from Königsberg, which at the time was a part of Germany.
This is very precise. You know, another confirmation is...
Then we found a German radio message.
Message is taken on 14th of April of 1945. Steamship Karlsruhe was sunk by air attack.
According to Cecil Alschot, it was Soviet airplanes that sank the ship, but we didn't know exactly where she went down. The breakthrough came when Tomek found the Soviet pilot's logbook. So this is logbook, yeah?
Yeah, from our Russian, you know, soldiers that sank Karlsruhe. And this report is especially important because they're giving us the positions, yeah?
Okay,
so
okay.
The first attack, what is 9 a.m., the pilot's position of the attack, yeah? And here you see the second attack, again with position.
On the end, we had 5 different coordinates of the place where Karlsruhe were sinking. And the difference between all of them was like 20 miles.
We'd narrowed it down, but 20 miles is still a huge distance to search. Then we had an idea.
All the fishermen, they have maps and they mark obstacles because they don't want to destroy the nets, and they give us these coordinates of these obstacles.
If you translate the positions from Russian report to this map, it will be roughly this area. Yeah.
We found a large underwater obstacle which can be marked in the area of the Soviet pilot's coordinates.
I think we have focused on this position here.
Yep.
12 months later, we were on our way.
Okay, guys, I will be speak a little Polish, a little English, but if my English is too good for you, let me know, yes?
So the idea was that we were sailing out to have 12 potential diving days before we were due back in port.
The plan is like this, that we want to dive in the morning. In general, we want to do it one long dive per day. Not too short, but one long
We had
dive.
archaeologists and historians on board to help us identify the wreck and document whatever we found.
There was a lot at stake, all resting on our research, and the question was, were we right about the location of the wreck?
We steamed through the night, woke up for breakfast next morning, and there we are out in the middle of the Baltic, approaching the dive site.
The sonar soon picked up a large object at 90 meters, but we had no idea whether or not it was the Karlsruhe. We simply had to go down there and have a look.
It is a very deep dive with a lot of repercussions to that. Come up too fast, bubbles will form inside your blood, inside your tissues, and cause ill effects. To get to 90 meters, you'd be looking at 4 or 5 minutes to get down there. It's very dark because you're very deep, so there's very little light penetration. And you come down in the dark, and you start to slowly realize there's some shape coming up ahead underneath you.
The atmosphere at the wreck when you arrive there is quite spooky.
The very first thing I noticed was there was a lot of net. It was basically rope netting, so very heavy, but it does cover everything.
The problem was that we were not 100% sure that the ship is Karlsruhe.
So we decided to go and try and find the name written on the ship, which in a more luxurious ship would be bronze or brass letters riveted into the hull. As we neared the bow, the amount of netting seemed to increase. And what you don't want to do as a diver is try to get under it, because that risks you being trapped, tangled within it.
To be able to uncover the letters, we had to cut some of the nets away.
It wasn't easy, but eventually, once the nets dropped away, we could finally see what lay beneath.
What became apparent was that the bridge area was heavily damaged.
There's a huge hole in the middle of the ship.
It was the right size and shape, and we could see evidence of bomb damage. But was it the Karlsruhe?
There was all kinds of seashells and mud on top of the side, but once we brushed it off, we actually could see the first letter there. I think it was the R.
That's in the word Karlsruhe.
We scrubbed some more and we could actually find 4 letters there. It was a great moment. Now we have identified it is indeed Karlsruhe.
I was so happy that we found the wreck, but the letter from the survivor was always in my mind. I was determined to find out everything I could about Karlsruhe's last voyage. What was a small steamship full of German civilians doing in the middle of the Baltic Sea in the last few months of the war?
father-in-law, who I knew for 30 years of my life and who I was very, very close to, was incarcerated here. He was a Polish patriot, and he fought in every way he possibly could think of to rid the country of the oppression, first of the Nazis and then of the Soviets. Because, of course, when the Germans left, the Soviets arrived and took the country for themselves. I've been in his cell and just think, what must it have been like? I sort of feel very angry that people were treated this way. People who were held here under Stalin who hadn't committed any crimes whatsoever except for being Polish. Generally speaking, the stories of what took place at the end of World War II in places like the Baltic were simply ignored after the war. So when I heard about the expedition to find the Karlsruhe, I thought it was fascinating. The ship left Königsberg, which was a city in the former German province of East Prussia. But at that time, April 1945, the German civilians were in grave danger. The advancing Soviets had them surrounded.
For most of those people, because they were farmers, it was the first journey in their life. They never left the village, but the rumor said that Russians kill everybody. So they have no other option.
They piled up sort of little wagons and carried their children. I mean, it was like any refugee exodus. It was absolutely terrible. But the German Navy stepped in and launched an evacuation, codenamed Operation Hannibal. This was a huge, a massive undertaking. Over 1,000 ships were sent to the rescue. It dwarfed the Allied evacuation from Dunkirk. Crammed with civilians, the ships headed west, but many didn't make it.
When we put all the pieces of the puzzles together, we realized that Cecil Alchot was one of the refugees and Karlsruhe was an Operation Hannibal ship.
These events shouldn't be lost and just become references in dusty books. So being able to piece together the entire story of Hannibal to honor the memory of the people that were lost, I think is important.
Uncovering this forgotten chapter of history was really a big moment, but there was still something that didn't make sense to me. The Karlsruhe was one of the last ships that left before Königsberg was captured by Red Army in April 1945. Thousands of desperate civilians would have been fighting for a place on that ship. But when we look at the archives, there was something that had puzzled us.
We knew that Karlsruhe was loaded with some soldiers, refugees, some workers. But what was interesting, they also specified 360 tons of cargo. What was the cargo? Why they used space of the ship for cargo instead for people?
When we did some digging, we realized there was something very valuable, last seen in Königsberg at the end of the war, that had vanished without a trace.
Tomek said, you know, maybe Amber Room is over there, yes? And it was like, oh, okay, it's a joke, yes? But he said, no, it's possible, yes, it's possible.
For me, the mystery of Amber Room and this possibility was really very exciting.
Then a little bit on the cargo hold.
It was like the beginning of treasure fever.
Under the sill.
Wow, this has really turned into a mystery. We're going off looking for an object like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Monuments Men.
It was known as the 8th wonder of the world, with 12 spectacular panels, each over 3 meters high. The Amber Room in St. Petersburg's Catherine Palace was one of Russia's most treasured works of art. imagine a golden room made up of this very important semi-precious stone, which really is petrified resin from ancient trees, with gilding and so on all around it. I mean, just magnificent place. The Baltic region is home to the largest known deposits of amber. The amber room was installed in the palace in the mid-1700s by Elizabeth, the Empress of Russia. But the amber room that stands there today is a replica. The original was stolen by the Nazis. The Germans stole everything. They stole national treasures, they stole statues, they stole paintings, they stole whatever they wanted. Some priceless masterpieces were recovered after the war, but the amber room, estimated to be worth $500 million, has never been found.
The amber room is the world's most valuable missing architectural art treasure. I've been an investigative journalist for many years, and the amber room was one of those intractable mysteries that looked like, something we could really get our teeth into. I personally related to a lot of the central characters in this story because I grew up in a family, half of whom lived in the former Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe. There was a series of archives in Moscow and St. Petersburg that would be key to this. And then on top of that, you've got all of the other basic building blocks of the investigation. You've got maritime, shipping records, you've got railway timetables, Allied bombing routes. The Germans were extraordinarily efficient. They arrive in the Catherine Palace, they break it off the walls, they throw the large pieces into long crates, and all the pieces of the amber room are boxed up and heading for Königsberg in East Prussia. When the amber room arrives in Königsberg, there's somebody waiting for it, and that person is Alfred Roeder. He was the person who placed the amber room on the list of treasures that the SS would take. We found archival documents that show the amber room was erected on the 3rd floor of a former ancient Teutonic castle in Königsberg. And I think Roeder would have felt impregnable in Königsberg. They controlled the coast, they're in an enclave surrounded by Nazi forces, and the castle is amazingly secure, so they can't think of a better place to keep one of their most important treasures.
But it turned out they were wrong. Because by January 1945, the Soviets were at the gates of the city. The situation in Königsberg was one of absolute desperation, chaos. There was a realization that the Red Army was very, very close.
We found a series of reports whereby Roeder gave an audit, if you like, of what was in the castle and what should be done about it. The amber room was on a list of things that needed to be moved. So many avenues are closed to a man like Roeder. Rail routes are closed. The road is treacherous. Perhaps the only avenue which would have been safe would be a ship leaving out through the Baltic coast.
It's possible that it could have been packed up and put on any of these ships that were involved in Operation Hannibal at that time.
The question was, which ship? During Hannibal operation, the biggest maritime evacuation ever, Germany lost 247 ships altogether. Our research showed that Karlsruhe was carrying a heavy cargo, which is unusual for civilian evacuation. But when we did some more digging, we realized it wasn't the only one. There was another Operation Hannibal ship, rumored to have a cargo, and she was one of the first to leave. The Wilhelm Gustloff.
The Wilhelm Gustloff was a ship that, in happier times for the Nazis, had been built as a cruise ship. If the amber room actually was evacuated on a ship, it's possible that it could be the Wilhelm Gustloff because the timing works, sort of 30th of January.
What we do know certainly is the amber room was packed up in crates in Königsberg Castle in January, ready to be evacuated from the city.
Eyewitness testimony does exist saying, yes, there were packages put on the Wilhelm Gustloff.
The wreck was classified. Nobody was allowed to go there. But in 1973, a team of Polish divers got permission to dive the Gustloff to try to find the amber room. So I went to meet one of the divers from that expedition.
Tutaj ty siedzisz na zdjęciu, tak?
Tak, po prawej stronie, po wyjściu z wody akurat.
To był rok 1970. To było bardzo trudno przekonać władze do tego. Ale powiedz mi, jaki był powód, dla którego ty chciałeś zanurkować na Gustloffie w tamtych latach?
Dla mnie niezrozumiała sprawa była tego, że to było po pierwsze utajnione. Nazywało się to przeszkoda wodna numer 73.
Nie miało nazwy.
Nie miało nazwy. Była sfałszowana pozycja. No, była ciągle w powietrzu wisiała legenda bursztynowej komnaty.
In the 1970s, divers didn't have the scanning technology which we have now, so Michał drew the wreck by hand.
Znaczy, notatki były od wskoczenia do wody do wyjść. 7 godzin nurkowych takich. Nurkowanie, zapamiętać, stworzyć sobie obraz, wrócić, narysować sobie szkic tego.
Michal's image showed the entire wreck for the first time. It had suffered terrible damage. The bulkheads are ripped apart and the hull is severed.
On uderzył o dno. Najpierw był storpedowany.
What happens on the night of the 30th of January is that these masses of people are cramming themselves on board this once ground vessel, fitting in as tightly as they possibly can, and over 10,000 people are on board. The Gustloff heads out into deep water and tries to make it as fast as possible toward the west. A Soviet submarine spots it and fires 3 torpedoes at the Gustloff. The ship goes down very, very quickly. It's estimated that 9,000 people died. 5,000 were children. It became the single largest tragedy at sea in history.
Since the 1970s, scans have showed the Gustloff in more detail. They revealed damage that is so unusual. It's thought that torpedoes were not the only cause.
There were all sorts of rumors that during the Cold War, the Soviets did send down divers. They tried to find out whether or not the amber room was actually on board.
It's rumored that Russia used explosive to rip open the hull, and when you look at the image of the wreck, some of the damage looks man-made.
I trudno jest w tej chwili powiedzieć, co było skutkiem dewastacji mechanicznej po uderzeniu w dno, a czy ktoś tam materiałami wybuchowymi, nie powiem tak, ani nie powiem nie, bo to można...
Czuliście rozczarowanie, że nie ma tam legendarnej bursztynowej komnaty?
Tak. No. Wiesz co, no, każdy eksplorator ma gdzieś w tyle głowy.
Whatever was loaded onto the Gustloff, it wasn't the amber room. So we looked for more clues that it was on the Karlsruhe. But what if the amber room never left Königsberg at all?
Perhaps elements of the amber room, if not all of the amber room, might have been destroyed in situ in Königsberg Castle. We know that by looking at diaries and accounts written by Red Army soldiers at the time. that showed that they saw Königsberg Castle as the epicenter of Nazism, as something that represented everything to do with the enemy that they detested. And filled with absolute rage and anger, the remnants of that castle were razed to the ground. And if the crates were there, it's quite likely that the Soviets destroyed their own treasure. There are plenty of people who won't accept that the Amber Room was destroyed in situ. My personal feeling is that it's inconclusive.
But Karlsruhe was carrying a heavy cargo, so we know something was loaded on that ship, and it was one of the last ships to leave. Tomek said, you know, if Germans want to send Amber Room to the west, for them, Karlsruhe was the last chance.
The next dives, we concentrate on the cargo hold. Could the Amber Room be in there?
We basically found very easily the entrance to the number 1 hold. Dropped down in, did a turn around, and the very first thing I saw was a motorbike. And then shone my light up above and beyond it, and there behind it was the truck.
Just as the survivors later described, a truck had fallen into the cargo hold.
And then we continued swimming, and basically the hold was full of great big dunes of silt and sediment that have built up over the 70 years she's been down there. But from those dunes were objects sticking through, just peeping through, so you were like, what is it? What's down there?
In my 40 years career of the diving, I never saw so many crates.
There was a couple of very big crates, part buried, at least half buried, but they were big enough that you could see this was a big box containing something.
They are very sturdy wooden boxes. Well, then you can think that, okay, maybe it's containing something valuable.
When I saw those crates, I was so excited. Was it possible that the Soviets hadn't destroyed their own treasure after all?
When I come here, I feel this tremendous sense of a mixture of trepidation and anger. In the same corridor that my father-in-law was held in were some terrible and notorious criminals. Rudolf Höss, who was the commandant of Auschwitz. Erich Koch was another of the prisoners. He was a notorious fanatical Nazi. Given the crimes he'd committed in the war, he should have been executed. The premise is that the Soviets kept him alive because they thought that perhaps he had information about the fate of the Amber Room. And one of the reasons that we think it's possibly out there is that the Soviets continued to look for it. They continued to question Koch. Erich Koch had been the governor of East Prussia. He pulled all the strings. Koch, of course, because he was in a privileged position, wasn't just trying to save his life, he was also able to get things that belonged to him out.
Koch himself had an enviable personal collection of treasure. Was it possible that among his collection, the things he tried to get evacuated from Königsberg would be the Amber Room?
It's possible that it survived and ended up on the ocean floor in one of the ships. There is a chance that it's still out there somewhere.
The drop line is over here, yes? And now is the moment that divers focus on the wreck, yes? I'm absolutely convinced that definitely Karlsruhe contains some kind of treasure.
And you can start to discuss and make sure it
The problem was that the site is a war grave, so we were not allowed to touch anything, including the crates.
I understand that this is very difficult.
But after days of discussion, finally the archaeologists gave us permission to bring one crate to the surface, but only one.
First step in professional way, yeah?
So the team had this huge dilemma. There were all sorts of crates and boxes down there. I mean, really, you're playing lucky dip.
one with this crate was in very good condition, made from very good wood.
It was basically a 2-meter oblong box. Very sturdy, very strong. Of all the crates we'd seen, this was the one that looked the most likely to yield results.
And so we start the operation of salvage the crate.
First, we had to try and get it out of the sediment, because anything in sediment, especially for 70 years, it's got suction that stops it coming out. It became apparent that it was going to move a lot easier than we thought, despite its size.
Of course, it disturbed the sediment. For a few minutes, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't even see fill in there.
I put a lifting strop round each end of the box, spreading the load so when it's lifted it wouldn't tip. So we had the rope from the box over a pulley, over another pulley. It's like pull, 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 and it started to move. And then when it got close to surface, 2 divers went to guide the box into the cage. And in the cage, with the crane, lifted it up.
We all gathered up to the deck, and everyone was very excited and hyped up to see what's inside.
There was a big crowd. There was all the divers, the archaeologists and historians. And so as they were washing the box off, the side just fell forward and fell open. And this black sediment just kind of oozed its way out. And almost immediately, cogs and iron and machinery started to appear.
And we see the cables inside, yes? Cables. And you know, it was the moment that energy gone.
There certainly wasn't any see-through, shiny orange material appearing. So the crowd halved almost immediately.
There was a little bit of disappointment for everybody, especially for Thomas.
You know, our expectation was so huge, yes?
Of course, everybody thought that it would be something amazing. Still, it's a piece of history and it's awesome.
But I have this feeling that this story is not ended now. After all the disappointment, something happened that I could never have expected. The expedition attracted huge attention from the media. I got phone calls and emails. Everybody wanted to know about the Amber Room. And then one day I got a really interesting message. Hello, I'm Renate, and my father survived Karlsruhe disaster. And it was like, oh my God, this is absolutely brilliant. This is amazing. I knew I had to go to meet him. Siegfried was born in Königsberg. He lived with his mother, 2 sisters, and older brother, and he was 7 years old when the Red Army arrived. You remember this moment when you have to leave Königsberg?
Wenn meine Mutter gesagt hat, wir müssen hier raus, gell?
My mother said, we need to get out of here.
Und das hier, das ist ein Nichts.
The Karlsruhe was very small,
Es gab nichts anderes.
but there was nothing else.
His mother made a bed for the children, and they slept overnight on the deck. But in the morning, the ship was attacked.
Wir waren hier in der Mitte von dem Schiff und der Torpedo.
We were here in the middle of the ship when the torpedo hit, and the ship practically broke apart.
So zerbrochen.
We were thrown up in the air and then fell into the water.
Dieser Sog nach unten
The suction pulled me down.
mitgenommen.
I kicked my legs to get back to the surface.
Hab wieder dagegen gearbeitet, kam wieder noch um.
Floating next to me was some bedding tied up with canvas and ropes.
Und eine Frau
A woman put the ropes around her hands.
ihre Hände getan. Und da sagte sie zu mir,
She said, "Come on, boy, I've got room for you too." And she took my hands and pulled them under the ropes.
die Frau
The woman
war mein Engel.
was my angel.
Siegfried was one of just 113 survivors. He didn't even know if his mother or his sibling were alive.
2 Jahre lang wussten wir nichts.
For 2 years, we knew nothing about each other. But then the German Red Cross found my mother in Copenhagen.
Eventually, Siegfried was reunited with his mother, brother, and older sister, but his youngest sister was lost.
Das Wasser war so kalt, so eiskalt,
The water was so cold, so icy cold,
nicht überlebt
that my little sister didn't survive it.
Hearing Siegfried's story was more valuable than any treasure. When we set out on this expedition, the wreck was lost, but now we knew her entire story.
For any relatives of anyone that was basically on board that ship, it's actually a marked place now. There's a place on a chart that says Karlsruhe went down here.
The tragic story of the passengers was always in our minds.
I think the most poignant for me, we were doing a circuit of the wreck at seabed level. As we dropped off the side, literally next to our downline, the first thing we came across was pretty much a complete skeleton.
Then you look at the shapes and what's on top of the deck, and then you could clearly see that there are skulls and bones, and beside the bone there's shoes. Then you just wondering like how it must have been.
It's close to 1,000 souls were lost on that ship. It wasn't fighting soldiers, it was just refugees, you know, women, old people, children, in great numbers, which really did, you know, bring it home, what we were diving and what tragedy that had happened here.
We put some flowers on the sea and spent a few minutes quietly and just thinking about respecting the people who passed alongside with the ship.
Of course, you know, treasure and amber attract a lot of interest, but this is not the main reason why we are diving. You know, the main reason is human stories. This is more valuable. Finding the Karlsruhe means what happened here on the Baltic Sea is not forgotten.